Three broke engineers sat inside a Denny's diner in San Jose in 1993, with no office, no product, and only $40,000 between them. And 32 years later, that same company would become the single most valuable company that has ever existed on planet Earth, worth more than $5 trillion. This is the full story of NVIDIA, and by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why almost every AI product you use today, ChatGPT, self-driving cars, robots, runs on chips made by one man's obsession that nearly bankrupted him 3 separate times. Let's go back to the beginning. It's January 1993. Jensen Huang is 30 years old, working as a director at a chip company called LSI Logic. He gets a call from two engineers he respects, Chris Malachowski from Sun Microsystems and Curtis Priem, a graphics chip designer also from Sun. They believe something big is coming. Personal computers are about to need dedicated hardware just to draw 3D graphics because the CPU alone cannot handle it. Nobody at the big companies believes this yet. So the three of them meet at a Denny's restaurant, order coffee, and decide to build a company around a bet that graphics processing deserves its own chip. On April 5th, 1993, NVIDIA is officially founded. The name comes from the Latin word invidia, meaning envy, because Jensen wanted every competitor to eventually envy what they built. They raised $20 million from Sequoia Capital and start working out of Curtis Priem's townhouse. Now here is where most people expect a straight line to success, but the real story is almost the opposite. In 1995, NVIDIA releases its very first product, called the NV1. It's a commercial failure. It uses a graphics technology called quadratic texture mapping, which goes against the direction Microsoft is pushing the entire industry with something called DirectX. Betting against Microsoft's standard is a death sentence in the PC industry, and NVIDIA nearly pays for it. By 1996, the company is down to 1 month of payroll left in the bank. Jensen is forced to lay off more than half the company, cutting staff from around 100 employees down to just 40. This is the moment NVIDIA almost dies, 3 years after being founded. But here's what makes this story different. Jensen makes a brutal decision. He tells his own co-founders that their strategy has failed and that from now on, NVIDIA will stop trying to invent its own standard and instead build the best possible chip using Microsoft's DirectX standard, competing purely on engineering execution against 90 other undifferentiated graphics companies that existed at the time. This is a humbling, unglamorous decision for a Silicon Valley startup, but it works. In 1997, with barely enough cash for 1 more month of payroll, NVIDIA launches the RIVA 128, a 128-bit processor that becomes a massive hit, selling over 1 million units within a year. The company survives. 1998 brings the RIVA TNT, and NVIDIA moves its headquarters to Santa Clara, California, where it still sits today. Then comes the year that changes everything. In January 1999, NVIDIA goes public on the Nasdaq at $12 a share. Later that same year, they release the GeForce 256. And this is the product that actually invents the term GPU, Graphics Processing Unit, as we know it today. It introduces something called hardware transform and lighting, which basically means the graphics chip can now do heavy math work that used to burden the main processor. This single product wins NVIDIA a contract with Microsoft to build the graphics chip for the original Xbox, a $200 million deal that cements NVIDIA as a serious player, not just another PC accessory company. Through the early 2000s, NVIDIA keeps expanding aggressively. In 2000, they acquire key assets from a struggling rival called 3DFX, which had actually been one of the dominant graphics brands of the 1990s, and by acquiring its patents and engineering talent, NVIDIA effectively removes one of its biggest threats from the board. By 2002, NVIDIA has shipped more than 100 million graphics processors, an almost unthinkable number for a company that was down to 40 employees just 6 years earlier. In 2001, they start supplying GPUs for Apple's Power Mac, a partnership that would continue for nearly 2 decades. In 2003, they even work with NASA to build a photorealistic simulation of Mars, and around this same period they become a major graphics supplier for Audi's vehicles, an early hint of the automotive ambitions that would matter enormously decades later. Sony picks NVIDIA to help design the graphics processor inside the PlayStation 3, locking in another console generation. By 2007, NVIDIA is named Forbes' Company of the Year. It looks like total dominance. Then comes another gut punch. Shortly after that Forbes cover, reports surface that a batch of NVIDIA's mobile chips and GPUs have abnormally high failure rates due to manufacturing defects. The company doesn't disclose which exact products are affected, customers get angry, and it triggers a class action lawsuit that drags on for years before finally being settled in 2010. This is NVIDIA's second near disaster, a reputational crisis, right when they were on top of the world. But quietly, back in 2006, 1 year before that Forbes award, Jensen had already made the decision that would define the next 20 years of the company. NVIDIA releases something called CUDA, a software platform that lets developers use NVIDIA's graphics chips not just for drawing video game images, but for general parallel computing, meaning running massive scientific and mathematical calculations. At the time, almost nobody understands why a graphics card company is investing enormous money into a software architecture that gamers don't even use. Wall Street questions it. Investors question it. For years, CUDA makes NVIDIA almost no money. It is, by every traditional business metric, a distraction. This is the single most important bet in the company's history, and here's why. Parallel processing, the exact thing GPUs are built for, turns out to be exactly what's needed for something researchers are working on called deep learning. In 2012, a neural network called AlexNet, trained using NVIDIA GPUs, wins a major image recognition competition by a shocking margin, proving that GPUs can train artificial intelligence dramatically faster than traditional processors. This moment is often called the spark of the modern AI era, and NVIDIA had accidentally spent 6 years building the exact infrastructure the entire AI industry would come to depend on. Through the 2010s, NVIDIA keeps releasing consumer gaming chips. The GeForce 10 series in 2016 built on their Pascal architecture, and later the RTX series that introduces real-time ray tracing, reinventing what graphics look like in games for an entire generation of players. But underneath the gaming headlines, their data center business, powered by CUDA and AI research labs around the world, keeps quietly growing year after year. In April 2016, they released the DGX-1, essentially a supercomputer in a box built around an 8 GPU cluster designed specifically to train deep learning models faster than anything else available. Universities, research labs, and eventually every major tech company on earth start buying these systems, and NVIDIA hardware quietly becomes the default tool inside almost every serious AI research paper published from this point forward. Along the way, NVIDIA also survives a wave of cryptocurrency mining booms and busts, where demand for their gaming GPUs would spike wildly as miners bought them to mine coins, only to crash just as fast when crypto prices fell, a volatile side business that taught the company how quickly hardware demand cycles could swing. Then 2020 hits and the pandemic actually accelerates NVIDIA's growth as demand for computing power explodes. They launch Omniverse, a virtual simulation platform for engineers, and open source Isaac Sim for training robots in simulated environments. By January 2021, NVIDIA's market cap crosses $328 billion. That number sounds massive at the time. It is nothing compared to what's coming. In late 2022, a company called OpenAI releases something called ChatGPT to the public. And within months, the entire world realizes that large language models are the future of computing. And every single one of those models has to be trained and run on GPUs. Specifically, the overwhelming majority of them run on NVIDIA hardware because of that same CUDA software ecosystem Jensen bet on back in 2006, an ecosystem that by now has 15 years of developer tools, libraries, and trust built into it that competitors simply cannot replicate overnight. What happens next is one of the fastest wealth creation events in stock market history. NVIDIA's market cap crosses $1 trillion in 2023. It crosses $2 trillion in early 2024. It hits $3 trillion in June 2024, becoming for a period the most valuable publicly traded company on the planet, ahead of Apple and Microsoft. In July 2025, it becomes the first company in human history to cross $4 trillion in market value. And by late 2025 into 2026, NVIDIA crosses $5 trillion, a number that back in 1996, when Jensen was laying off half his staff to survive one more month, would have sounded like complete fiction. Today, NVIDIA's newest architecture is called Blackwell, with the next generation, Rubin, expected to bring even more advanced memory and networking built specifically for training massive AI models. Their biggest customers include OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Meta, and Oracle. Literally every major AI lab on the planet is spending tens of billions of dollars buying NVIDIA hardware to train and run their models. NVIDIA's data center revenue alone now dwarfs what the entire company used to make in a year just 5 years ago. Jensen Huang, still the CEO after more than 32 years leading this exact same company, is now one of the richest people alive with a net worth exceeding $120 billion. So here is what makes NVIDIA's story genuinely remarkable, and why I wanted to make this video. This was not a company that got lucky once. It nearly went bankrupt in 1996 and survived through brutal execution. It got hit by a reputation-destroying lawsuit right after its biggest award in 2007. It spent 6 years and enormous resources on a software platform, CUDA, that made almost no money and that most of Wall Street thought was a waste. And every single one of those decisions, the humbling pivot to DirectX, the relentless engineering focus, and especially the CUDA bet nobody understood, is exactly what positioned NVIDIA to become the backbone of the entire artificial intelligence revolution decades later. The lesson underneath all of this is simple. NVIDIA didn't predict ChatGPT in 2006. Jensen didn't know AI would explode the way it did. What he did know was that parallel computing was fundamentally more powerful than the way computers had always worked, and he was willing to fund that belief for over a decade before the world caught up to him. That is the actual story behind the most valuable company on earth. Not a lucky overnight success, but 3 near-death experiences and one 20-year bet that finally paid off bigger than anyone could have imagined. If you want the next video breaking down exactly how Jensen Huang runs NVIDIA's internal culture today and why he refuses to have scheduled one-on-one meetings with 60+ direct reports, make sure you're subscribed because that story is even wilder than this one.